Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. Wrestling isn't just a sport. It's a lifestyle, a grueling mix of passion and pain. Most people think it's all glitz and glamour. The roaring crowds, the blinding lights, the larger-than-life personas. But there's a darker side to it, something no one really talks about. It's not just the bruises or the politics behind the scenes. It's the places we go, the arenas. They have their own stories, their own ghosts. And one night in Indiana, I came face to face with one of them. It was a rundown venue, the kind you only see in small towns that cling desperately to their golden years. The outside was covered in peeling paint and graffiti, and the sign out front, Indiana Wrestling Coliseum, had two letters missing, dangling by rusted bolts. Inside, the air was thick and stale, like the building itself was tired of standing. The walls were streaked with water stains, and the floor creaked under every step. The moment I walked in, I felt it a weight heavy on my chest. Something was wrong with the place. But I'd wrestled in dozens of dumpy venues before, and I wasn't about to let a little bad juju get to me. The crew was whispering about something as they set up the ring. I caught bits and pieces of their conversation. Right there in the middle of the mat, blood everywhere, and refused to come back after that night. I ignored them. Wrestlers are a superstitious bunch, always talking about curses and bad omens. I figured it was just small-town gossip. Later, I found out the truth. Back in the 80s, a guy named Johnny the Hammer Hargrove had a fatal accident in this very ring. He was a big name on the regional circuit, known for his brutal pile drivers. During a match, something went horribly wrong. He slipped, lost control of the move, and broke his neck on impact. They said he died instantly, right there in front of a packed crowd. The promoter didn't bother warning me about any of this. To him, it was just another show to sell tickets for. That night, the place was packed, the crowd louder than you'd expect for a town this small. It was one of those rare nights where you felt like a star, even if it was just for a couple of hours. My match was scheduled as the main event, a grudge match against a guy named Big Mike. The storyline was simple. I was the heel, the villain everyone loved to hate, and Mike was the hometown hero. I was supposed to lose, make him look good, and get the crowd roaring. But halfway through the match, everything changed. We were locked up in the middle of the ring, me whispering my next move to Mike, when the lights went out. Not just the stage lights, everything. The arena plunged into pitch blackness. The crowd gasped, then went eerily silent. You'd think they'd start booing or chanting, but no. It was as if they were holding their breath. I felt my way to the ropes, shouting for the ref, but he didn't answer. My eyes started adjusting to the darkness, and that's when I saw him. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, just a shadow in the corner of the ring. But as my vision cleared, I realized it wasn't. He was standing there, motionless at the far corner. A pale man in a torn wrestling singlet, his face gaunt and hollow like he hadn't eaten in weeks. His eyes, God, his eyes were black pits, empty and endless. He was staring straight at me, not moving, not blinking. "Mike," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Do you see this?" But Mike didn't answer. When I glanced back, He was frozen in place, his face pale as a ghost. He saw it too. The crowd started murmuring, thinking it was part of the show. Some even laughed nervously, probably thinking we'd planned this as some kind of spooky gimmick. But there was nothing planned about this. The air around me felt icy cold, and every instinct in my body screamed to get the hell out of there. The figure raised one hand and motioned for me to come closer. His movements were slow, deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. My legs felt like they were made of lead, but something, curiosity, fear, I don't know, made me take a step forward. That's when he lunged. It happened so fast I barely had time to react. One moment he was across the ring, and the next he was inches from my face. His hand brushed my shoulder, and I swear it felt like plunging into ice water. My entire body locked up, and a scream caught in my throat. The lights flickered once, twice, and then came back on. He was gone. I stumbled back, gasping for air. The ref was back, Mike was back, and the crowd was cheering, oblivious to what had just happened. I finished the match on autopilot, barely aware of what I was doing. When the bell rang and the match was over, I bolted backstage. Later that night, I asked the referee if he saw anything. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. What are you talking about? The blackout? That was just a breaker issue. Happens all the time in old venues like this. But it wasn't a breaker. It wasn't a trick of the light or my imagination. I know what I saw, and I'm not the only one. Over the years, I've heard other wrestlers talk about strange things happening in that arena. Lights going out, cold spots in the ring, whispers in the locker room. They all laugh it off as urban legend. But I've been in that ring. I've felt the cold hand of Johnny the Hammer Hargrove. And I'll tell you this, wrestling might be fake, but what I saw in that ring was real. That was the last time I ever set foot in Indiana. Some places are better left forgotten. Story 2. Wrestling's a funny business. It's loud, sweaty, and full of adrenaline. But beneath the bright lights and screaming fans, there's an underbelly. The quiet spaces backstage, the lonely roads, and sometimes the places you wrestle, they can haunt you in ways you'd never expect. I'll never forget that night. It was a small town show, the kind where the fans cram into an ancient venue that smells like beer and mildew. The kind of place that's seen too many winters and not enough renovations. The locker rooms were in the basement, a dimly lit maze of brick walls, exposed pipes, and flickering fluorescent lights. It felt like stepping into a crypt. I was the first one there, which wasn't unusual. I liked to get in early, lace up my boots, and clear my head. The matches were routine, but the crowd deserved a good show, and I took pride in giving them one. That night, though, I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. The air down there was heavy, like the room hadn't been ventilated in decades. Every sound, the drip of a leaky pipe, the creak of the floor above, seemed amplified. I was sitting on the bench, tightening my laces, when I heard it. Help me. It was faint, almost drowned out by the hum of the overhead lights. I froze, my hands hovering over my boots. For a second, I thought someone was playing a prank, some new guy trying to mess with the veterans. But when I looked around, the room was empty. Just rows of old lockers, some dented, others rusted shut, and my reflection staring back at me in the cracked mirror on the far wall. Help me. This time, it was louder. A whisper, but insistent. It sounded close, like someone was right behind me. My stomach tightened, and I spun around so fast I nearly tripped over my gear bag. Nothing. The room was as empty as before, but now it felt colder, like a draft had snuck in from nowhere. I tried to shake it off. Wrestlers are a superstitious bunch, but I wasn't about to let a little spooky atmosphere get in my head. I chalked it up to my imagination, the way your brain plays tricks when you're alone in an unfamiliar place. Still, my hands were trembling as I tied the last knot in my laces. Then it happened. The door to one of the lockers slammed shut with a deafening clang. The sound echoed through the room, bouncing off the brick walls like a gunshot. I jumped to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. That locker had been open. I was sure of it. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. No answer. Just the drip, drip, drip of the pipe and the faint hum of the lights. I walked toward the locker, every step feeling heavier than the last. My boots scraped against the concrete floor, the sound unnervingly loud in the empty room. When I reached the locker, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the latch, my instinct screaming at me to leave it alone. But curiosity, or maybe stupidity, won out. I yanked the door open. Nothing. The locker was empty, save for a faint smell, something metallic and sharp. Blood? No, it was too faint for that. I slammed it shut and backed away, my heart racing. That was when I noticed it. The mirror. The mirror on the far wall, the one I'd glanced at earlier, was fogged up. The room wasn't warm enough for that. And in the fog, a single phrase was scrawled, like someone had dragged a finger across the surface. "Help me, don't leave." I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my gear bag. My breath came in short gasps, and I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't my imagination. I grabbed my gear and bolted upstairs. The show went on, and I wrestled my match, but I barely remember it. My mind was back in that basement, replaying every sound, every shadow. After the match, I thought about leaving without going back down there. But my wallet and keys were still in the locker room, so I had no choice. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and headed down. The room was silent when I entered, but the uneasy feeling was still there, thicker than before. My gear bag was where I'd left it, but everything inside was scattered across the floor. My boots, my tape, even my lucky wristband, they were strewn about like someone had gone through them in a frenzy. And on the mirror, the words had changed. "You didn't help?" They were dripping now, as if written in water or blood. I didn't stick around to find out. I grabbed my things, ran up the stairs, and didn't look back. I asked around later, trying to piece together some kind of explanation. One of the older guys mentioned a story about a wrestler who died there in the 70s. A heart attack right before his match. They said he'd been pounding on the locker doors, calling for help, but no one heard him in time. I don't know if it's true, and honestly, I don't care. All I know is I've never set foot in that venue again. And if I ever find myself in a basement locker room like that, I make sure I'm never alone. Story 3. Wrestling has always been my life. Not the fame, not the money. Though believe me, I wouldn't mind a bigger paycheck. No, for me it's the crowd, the roar of fans, the way they hang on every move, every slap of the mat. Wrestling is theater, adrenaline, and raw power rolled into one. That's why I took the booking in Burkett. You probably never heard of it. Tiny town in the middle of nowhere. The kind of place where the local diner's your best bet for dinner and a stranger at the gas station feels like an event. The promoter, Job Smiley Carson, was an old-timer with a knack for exaggerated promises. "You'll love it, man," he told me. "Small venue, but the crowd is rabid. Best fans you'll ever wrestle for." He didn't lie about the crowd. The high school gym was packed wall to wall, their faces lit up with excitement. But the place itself? It felt off. The overhead lights buzzed like angry wasps, casting uneven shadows across the ring. The bleachers creaked under the weight of eager fans, and the smell of sweat and damp would hung in the air. The whole place felt tired, like it had seen better days decades ago. "Your partner's running late," Smiley told me as I laced up my boots. "You're gonna have to go out first." Great. Nothing like a handicap match to get the blood pumping. I didn't even know who my partner was supposed to be, just that he'd been swapped in last minute. "Who is it?" I asked. Smiley hesitated. Some local guy filling in. Don't worry, he'll show." He didn't seem worried, so I figured I shouldn't be either. Wrestling's like that sometimes. Things change last second, and you roll with it. The announcer called my name, and I headed to the ring. The crowd was deafening, stomping and chanting. My opponents, the Hammer Brothers, were already there. Two guys built like brick walls, glaring at me with matching grins. This was going to hurt. The bell rang, and we went to work. For the first few minutes, I held my own, dodging hits and landing a few of my own. But 2-on-1 is a losing game. Before long, they had me pinned in the corner, trading blows like they were tenderizing me. My ribs ached, my head spun, and the crowd's chants blurred into white noise. Then it happened. A slap on my shoulder. A firm, solid slap, like the tag of a partner who knew exactly what he was doing. Startled, I stumbled forward, and the Hammer Brothers froze. I turned around. He was there, standing on the apron. The guy was tall, lean but muscular, wearing a silver mask that gleamed under the harsh lights. His gear was old school, silver tights, silver boots, like something out of a wrestling promo from the 80s. I had no idea who he was, but he gave me a small nod, almost like a soldier signaling, "I've got this." The crowd erupted as he vaulted over the ropes, moving with a grace that didn't match his size. The Hammer Brothers charged at him, but it was like running into a freight train. He clotheslined one, then spun the other into a suplex so clean it looked rehearsed. For the next 5 minutes, I stood on the apron, watching in awe as he dismantled them. The guy was a machine, moving faster and hitting harder than anyone I'd ever seen. The Hammer Brothers, who'd been grinning like wolves just minutes before, looked downright terrified. The match ended with a double pin. My mysterious partner had one foot on each opponent's chest as the ref slammed the mat 3 times. The crowd lost their minds. I climbed into the ring to thank him, but he was already stepping out, heading up the ramp. "Hey," I called after him, but he didn't turn around. The shadows swallowed him, and he was gone. Backstage, I found Smiley pacing near the lockers. "Who the hell is that guy?" I asked. "He's incredible. You need to book him for every show." Smiley frowned. What guy? My partner. The dude in the silver mask. He's the reason we won tonight. Smiley's face went pale. Silver mask. His voice cracked. You're joking. I shook my head. No joke. He dominated the whole match. Didn't you see him? Smiley swallowed hard, then leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. That sounds like Silver Ace. The name rang a faint bell. Who's that? Smiley's eyes darted around like he was worried someone might overhear. Silver Ace was a local legend. Wrestled here back in the 80s. Died in a car crash on his way to a match. It happened 15 years ago to the day. I laughed nervously, waiting for him to crack a smile, but he didn't. Come on, Smiley. You're messing with me. I swear on my mother's grave, he said. You're not the first wrestler to see him. They say he shows up when someone's in trouble, when the match needs saving. But he's been dead a long time. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, the gleaming mask, the way he moved like he was from another world. I wanted to believe Smiley was just pulling a prank, but deep down, I knew he wasn't. The slap on my shoulder had been real. The way he fought had been real. And yet, he was gone, just like that. The next morning, as I packed up to leave town, I found a single silver boot lace in my bag. I hadn't put it there. To this day, I keep it in my gear bag, a quiet reminder of the night I wrestled alongside a ghost. And every time I step into the ring, I find myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see him standing there, ready to tag in. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: some legends never die.